Wellesley-Weston Lifetime Learning offers non-credit courses to seniors in the greater Boston area. For more information about WWLL and links to our videos, please go to www.llcourses.org.
The Electoral College. The Electoral College.
The Electoral College.
So what is the Electoral College? Back when America was still a new country, the 13 colonies decided that in order to vote for a new president, each state should have representatives vote on behalf of their people. However, the number of voters each state had was affected by population, and the southern states with lots of plantations and slavery took advantage of this, even though slaves and women were not recognized as citizens and were therefore unable to vote. Since its early beginnings, the Electoral College has grown to include all 50 states, and there are now 538 electors. But why does the Electoral College matter? We vote on our next president, right? Well, actually, that's only half the truth. In the 2000 presidential election, Al Gore beat George W. Bush by 543,895 votes. That's a lot of votes. So why wasn't he our president? Well, Bush won the electoral vote with 271 votes, just one over the 270 that he needed. This was a huge upset, and it even went to Supreme Court. It was decided that Bush had in fact won, so he became our next president. So, why do we use this system? The Electoral College actually has a few plus sides, including that all 50 states are involved in choosing our president, and that it guarantees the outcome of the election. Should we abolish or change the Electoral College? Let's take a look at this year's presidential election.
This was the popular vote from the 2016 presidential election. As you can see, the statistics are predominantly Democratic. However, this is the Electoral College vote. In this version of the map, it is almost entirely Republican, even though the popular vote was Democratic.
The whole number of electors appointed to vote for President of the United States is 538, of which a majority is 270. Donald Trump of New York has received, for President of the United States, 304 votes. Hillary Clinton of the state of New York has received 227 votes.
The turnout of this election had a massive reaction, both positive and oppositional. This has caused the Electoral College to come into question. The Electoral College even gives people in certain states more voting power than people in others due to the discrepancy with which votes are assigned. For example, each state is guaranteed at least 3 votes. According to CGP Gray, a YouTube analyst and content creator, this allows for states like Rhode Island, which should only have 2 votes, to have 4, while states like California, which should have 65 votes, only have 55. This means that a vote from a small state is worth more than a vote from a large state.
Which is in Article 2, Section 1, there are clauses 2 and 3, says that each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislatures thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress, but no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector.
Hey, I believe in the one person, one vote rule. I believe a vote should have the same weight wherever it's cast.
Okay, so how could the Electoral College be changed or abolished? The first idea that comes to mind is a petition, one of which has actually gained great support in the months since the election. It now has over 600,000 signatures on MoveOn.org. One could also override the system like the Hamilton Electors, a pro-college group, are now doing. The Hamilton Electors are citizens participating in the electoral process who believe that the presidential electors are responsible for protecting our nation's future and ensuring that the next president is the best person for the job. And they plan to do this by choosing to elect a responsible Republican as president that will appease both Democrats and Republicans. There could also be faithless electors, who are electors that vote against their state's or district's winning candidate. If enough electors choose to become faithless electors, they could quote-unquote beat the system. Could we abolish or change the Electoral College on a government level?
I'm going to tell you that it's going to go away anytime soon. It's extraordinarily difficult to amend the Constitution. The Republican Party in particular right now certainly sees it in its interest to maintain the Electoral College, and so they're not going to, we're not going to be able to get to that, to the sort of near unanimity that the Constitution requires to change things, so it's not going anywhere.
It needs to be changed. The Congress and Senate will make the new policy based on the public support.
Now that we know what we can do, we have to make a choice. Should we change the college or abolish it completely?
We believe that a change is necessary and that there should be a unified electoral policy regarding faithless electors and who an elector can vote for. One example of how such a system could work was proposed by Professor Arnold Barnett and Professor Robert Kaplan from the MIT Sloan School of Management and Harvard Business School.
A move to a popular vote is not going to happen in the foreseeable future. The question is it possible to have something of a win-win situation which doesn't dilute the advantages of the current arrangements and yet moves us closer to a popular vote so that both Democrats and Republicans might argue that the changes would benefit them?
The Electoral College needs to be changed, but there isn't enough support or infrastructure to abolish it yet. The President and Congress need to create a unified statewide policy surrounding the college and who electors are required to vote for, one where every vote is equal. If we adopt a system like the one proposed by Professor Barnett and Professor Kaplan, we will be able to conduct much more fair and accurate elections.
I think moving to a popular vote system is not without peril, it's not without problems, it's not a simple, one choice is all good, the other is all bad. It's a balancing act.
The new president and Congress need to address the Electoral College because it defines the future of our country.
Our voice, our vote.
Are you still confused about the Electoral College and how it works? Do you think we should keep it? Do you think we should change it? Or do you think we should ditch it? Today, 2 residents of Wellesley-Weston who have been electors to the Electoral College as one of the 11 electors from Massachusetts who cast their vote for the presidency will share their experience. Joe Mullin was someone who cast his electoral vote in Clinton's campaign, and he was also, in 2000, he was at the Democratic Convention with Gore, and you will find out shortly why he was there. Nazda was an elector this past election for Hillary Clinton. She also served as an alternate to vote for President Obama in 2012. So they will give you the background, and please ask lots of questions because they'll be able to answer them. So we so look forward to having them. Okay.
In 1993, I became the citizen, and the next day I registered as a Democrat. Since then, I am a diehard Democrat. Okay. I was involved with the Democratic Party, started 2004 to campaign for Howard Dean as a presidential candidate. Since then, I've been working with the local, national, and statewide election with Joe, and we both are the Democratic State Committee member. I am since 2008. So my point is, Joe will give more information about the Electoral College, but mine is very personal thing. I just came back from Asia, traveled. It's a small, tiny country of Bangladesh, and you could not believe that how people energized about our election this 2016. From the cab driver to professor in university, everyone has same question about the Electoral College and popular vote. Why is that? Why is not that other one? So this is interesting to internationally, not only locally. People are talking about that, how presidential election can be decided, and people of this country will decide someday with our congressional delegate. So I have some basic information. You probably know, but I'm saying that Electoral College, the popular voting and losing president for the 5th time since the last century, and 2 in this century, 2008 and 2016. And interestingly, the information in all losing popular voted elected presidential candidates are Democrat. That's interesting though. Only Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. So that, other than, so now when the question is whether we keep Electoral College or we eliminate or we change, anything we do, I feel it is good for Democrats. Because now, the statistics that Democrats said, 51% of voters live in only 9 states, and that in 2024 to 2030, that will come only to 6 states. And that's a good sign for the Democrat to get the presidential election. And the other thing I have found, the demography of the voters for the popular vote and the Electoral College vote, which is few categories we see. One is race. Mostly rural white voters are Republican, and urban voters are Democrat. That can be white and non-white, but the rural, urban, white voters mostly low. So they will help the Electoral College always. And that's why probably the Republican will not willing to change, to do thing, but that's my perception there. And then other thing is the citizenship of the voters. Mostly the immigrant citizens, voters, 95% are Democrat. So if more immigrants population grow in a year, and that's good for Democrat. That's my, and I've been studying it, and I saw that this is a good way. And then the people of color, other than immigrant, Hispanic, even they are born here, because the immigrant people, the second generation are American, but the diverse population, the Hispanic and other non-white, they are mostly are Democrats. So no matter which way the Electoral College go, I am very hopeful for the future. And that's basically I want to say. And then if you have a question, here Joe will give all over the information about the Electoral College. And my personal information, a little bit, I have a C-SPAN video have done by the 8th graders in a middle school in Western Massachusetts. I wanted to see, do you want to see that now or after you?
Why don't we see it now, Nazda?
And I also spoke about the Electoral College in Bangladesh, 3 sessions, 2 in university, 1 in the Women Empowerment Conference.
The Electoral College is a very urgent issue. It is estimated that about 98% of all campaign money and the candidates' visits were only about 12 to 15 states. How is this fair to all the other states? Does everybody really have an equal vote?
The Electoral College is a system that we use to elect our president. Each state has a certain amount of votes, but a state can have no less than 3 votes. When you vote, you are voting for the electors who elect a president.
When the people's votes are in, the electors vote, and the candidate with the most votes from the electors get all the electoral votes. For example, if you got 51% of votes in Florida, you'd get all 29 electoral votes. The only exceptions are Nebraska and Maine, who can split their votes. The candidate that gets to 271st wins the election and becomes president. Sometimes the person that wins the popular vote does not win the presidency.
First question, what's wrong with the Electoral College?
Three quick things come to mind. First, each vote doesn't count the same. Second, your vote is not necessarily cast for the candidate for whom you vote. It could be cast, you not only lose your vote, you could have it counted for the person you voted against under the unit rule system where all the state's electors go one way. All the losing votes in a given state go for the one who wins. Third, and most importantly, it doesn't guarantee that the person who gets the most votes is going to be president. Now, those are three basic criteria that apply to every other election in the country.
We asked Eric Lesser if he supports the Electoral College and if we should change or tweak it.
I think at the very minimum we should look at other options and other ways to pick a president that's more representative and that includes everybody. That every vote should be equal and every vote should be counted the same. If you can.
We also asked Nazda Alam, a state elector for the state of Massachusetts, the same question.
I like to keep the Electoral College system, but I wanted to see some change where the member of the Electoral College, number of the Electoral College would be ratio with the population.
But the Electoral College does have its positives.
The Electoral College has been a huge part in American history. The system can be a good thing too. The Electoral College avoids a recount once all the votes are cast, gives a small state a voice in the system of choosing our president, represents the country as a whole, not as individual states, strengthens the country's federalist character, and the two-party system keeps a firm stability.
That's how I like the Electoral College because it is the base of US democracy.
Do you think that it is fair that the popular vote winner has lost the Electoral College more than once?
It's proof that there might be a structural kink here that we need to work out, which is you've now had 2 times in 16 years that a candidate has lost the popular vote but become president. And this year you have a situation where somebody, the margin has never been this big since the 19th century.
Choosing the electors is a two-part process. The first step is the political parties in each state choose potential electors. Next, on election day, the voters in each state cast their vote.
There are very few requirements for an elector to serve. The basic disqualification is that a person may not be a federal government official. But other than that, any state official or just ordinary citizen can serve as an elector.
We asked Nazda Alam how it feels to be the first female Muslim American elector in the Electoral College.
I'm very proud of myself that I am the first Muslim female member of the Electoral College. And I also feel that United States is the place, if you are qualified, you can get anywhere you are.
4 states, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Virginia had nearly 3/5 of all visits and all campaign ads in the peak season. Big swing states, those votes really matter. And the reason is that if you happen to lose all 3 or 4 of the big swing states in a close election, you could lose despite winning the popular.
Does the Electoral College protect the small states?
So I think that, the original goal of the Electoral College was to create balance so that the smaller states felt like they had as much of a sort of stake in the system as the larger states. I don't actually think the Electoral College has really worked that way because there's a lot of very small states like Wyoming or Vermont that never get any attention or any visits from presidential campaigns.
I think so, because when you see if only presidential election based on the popular vote, then what would happen? Only big state will have presidential election and the small state will not.
In America today, 65% of people want to get rid of the system, and 35% of people want to keep the Electoral College. How will we decide whether to keep the Electoral College or obliterate it? That is why we need to address this issue to the new president and Congress.
As you can see by this video, the Electoral College is a very important issue to be addressed by the new president and Congress. We need a lot of this decided about the Electoral College going into the years to come. Thank you for listening.
Five times, in essence, what's happened in our nation's history is that the individual who has not won the popular vote has lost the election. So that's really the basis of the discussion. When the Founding Fathers got together and created the Constitution in 1787, they were mindful of the fact that Boston and Philadelphia and Baltimore and Richmond, Virginia were the population centers in Philadelphia, and they wanted to protect the rural areas of the country, and they did so. And in doing so, our country has changed since then. So that is really what Nazda was talking about and this film was talking about. I would even go so far as to say that the provocative aspect of the system is that it has consequences, and that is if you look at the individuals through history who have won, for those of you who are really into a lot of deep United States history, Rutherford B. Hayes lost to Samuel Tilden. Rutherford B. Hayes won over Tilden. Tilden got 4.2 million and Hayes got 4 million votes. Mr. Hayes, was the Republican nominee, and his appeal to the southern states is that he would withdraw all federal troops, protecting the Reconstruction and the protection of the rights of freed slaves in the southern states. When that happened, you had the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow. So that's an idea of really the policies that might happen from any particular individual who finishes second rather than first. But what you've heard here is that, in essence, the two elections, the 2016 and 2000, resulted in the person finishing second winning first. To go over the most recent election, Hillary Clinton received 65.8 million votes. Donald Trump received 62.9 million votes. Hillary received 48.2% of the vote. Donald Trump received 46.1% of the vote. And so that is really the differential that you have. Where does the inequity actually occur in terms of this electoral system we're discussing? Under the Constitution, every state in the Electoral College gets 2 votes for the vote of the presidency, irrespective of the population of the state. So when you were voting in Wyoming, where Donald received a good 65 to 70% of the vote, you have 800,000 people voting. 2 votes went to Donald Trump out of that number. When the 45 million people voted in California, they also received 2 votes. Those went to Hillary Clinton. And that's where the inequity begins to occur. Now, the other idea that I will brief you on before I seek input from you good people who are here is that the Electoral College can be reformed by one of 2 ways. The most pronounced and legalistic way is that you in essence go for an amendment to the United States Constitution. Now, does anyone know how the United States Constitution is amended? Is there anyone who would know how to begin to amend the United States Constitution? Any constitutional lawyers in the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think that a certain percentage of states have to okay it, and that's very difficult.
You have to have 2/3 of the states approve a constitutional amendment and 2/3 of the United States House and the United States Senate as well. It's a very arduous process. Does anyone know how many amendments have been made to the United States Constitution in our history? Again, this is really fairly down in the depths. 27 amendments. The first 10 are called the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights protects our freedom of speech and our freedom to assemble. And that is the arduous, lengthy, long way to go ahead and to amend the way that we have a system that allows the person finishing second to win the presidency of the United States. But there's another way, and that is the one that's getting cachet and a bit of momentum these days, and that is there are a variety of ways that you can reform your system nationally, working through the state legislatures without affecting the constitutional definition. Briefly, you heard the state of Maine and the state of Nebraska have altered their systems where, in essence, in each congressional district, the person winning that district actually gets that vote, rather than on a statewide basis. Therefore, the state of Maine, many of you may know this already, but in the 1st District of Maine, this coming election, that went for Donald Trump. In the 2nd District of Maine, in the Portland area, that went for Hillary Clinton. The other 2 votes went for Hillary Clinton. So Donald received 1 out of the 4 Maine electoral votes. 4 years ago, it was quite the opposite with Barack Obama. He received 1 vote from the city of Omaha. That Omaha, Nebraska district voted for him. He received that electoral college vote. The rest of the state voted for his opponent, and therefore that went for his opponent at that time. So that's one of the ways to reform things. The state of Maryland has come up with an idea, and that idea is that, in essence, the state of Maryland's electors will vote only for the individual who actually wins the popular vote. And so Maryland is interested in having its electors vote. In this case, they would vote for Hillary, and if it had been Donald, then he would have voted for Donald Trump. So those are the ways that are being thought about. The final way that has been offered in the conversations we've had with other meetings, Nazda and I, is perhaps the Electoral College vote should be divided proportionately among the states or within the states. One of the themes that people don't realize is that, in essence, we do not have a national election every 4 years. We have 51 separate state elections for the President of the United States. The 51st vote, of course, is for Washington, D.C. So when you have those 51 state elections, then you have that tallied up, and that's how you will elect the vote. The Maryland idea is that you go ahead and have a vote only for the individual who wins that national vote. They're trying to get other states to go along with them, and once they get a great number of states, then that's their reform. But I would be interested in your thoughts, whatever you might think of this system and Nazda's comments in this background as to whether we should do away with the Electoral College entirely, just have the national vote, or do some other reform. So if anyone is interested in commenting or have any questions, I'd be happy to open it up at this time. So anyone want to comment or ask a question?
2 things. The last election I saw a perfect storm in that it wasn't a razor narrow margin. And we had a candidate who differed substantially. It's one thing for people to be philosophical about the outcome when both candidates are pretty much centrists. But when you have one that's far out on his wing, that obviously makes a lot of people incensed about the outcome. So I wasn't surprised that there's so much dismay about this thing. But when you think about the fact that once the senators were not elected by popular vote, in the middle of the 19th century, we changed that. We said every citizen gets to vote, and it's going to work that way. And I think when you see the Electoral College in that light, that there was a change from this notion that the common people really should not be trusted with electing senators, and you should extend that then to the presidential election, because I know that the Electoral College was largely seen in that light by the framers of the Constitution, and the lack of trust in the common people.
Yes, that's really the basic theme that was behind the Founding Fathers. You expressed it as the lack of trust, and I think they saw it more as a matter of vested interest in making sure that it was a good government that was created in the aftermath of the American Revolution and the defeat of the British. But he's right. In essence, the United States senators, up until around 1916, it wasn't the 19th century, it was the 20th century, and I think it's the 16th or 17th Amendment that said that the election of the United States senators shall be by the popular vote in the state rather than by the state legislature. Many of you are familiar with the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858 went all over the state of Illinois, but at the end of the day, it was the state legislature which voted, and they voted for Stephen Douglas for the United States Senate. So Abraham Lincoln lost that election, but it was not a popular vote. It was done by the state legislature. So that was changed, and what you're hinting at is that if you trust the people entirely, maybe perhaps we go ahead and reform the good old state of Wyoming and the good old state of California so that all votes count equally, and if you did that, that would be a national popular vote. Am I reflecting what you're interested in, sir? Yes, okay. Anybody else like to? Yes, sir.
I hope you'll all forgive me for talking out of ignorance, but I feel very strongly that the election of the president should be based on the popular vote. And I think one of the basic tenets of the United States is that it relates to equality. And there are all kinds of decisions that people could make if there were still an electoral college. I find it extremely complicated. It's contrary to what's done in other countries around the world, and it seems to me that it is the fairest approach to electing a president, that the president should be elected by, should depend on the most people who want that individual to be president.
Thank you. You want to comment on that, Nazda?
Yeah. I agree with you. I agree with you, and also I feel this is just very special features of United States presidential election, which no other country has it. So in that case, I am closer to not to abolish, but change. I think if we have the system like Maine has, then each state will get their electoral college voters according to their population and vote. So that will help the popular vote and the electoral college. That's my point.
Yeah, I think that having Nazda say that, that's the reforms that the state of Maine has done and the state of Nebraska has done is a halfway measure. It doesn't get to where you want to go. What it does do is it sort of spreads, it allows the expressions more locally of voters, let's say in Cape Cod or Western Massachusetts or northern New Hampshire and southern New Hampshire, to be balanced out so that you'd have a right. But what you're hinting at is the principle I talked about with the Peace Corps and diplomats going around the world and doing nation building, and that is most votes win. And that's I think the principle you're espousing, and that's the one behind the national popular vote movement. So, anyone else now commenting? Yes, sir.
Am I in the right? Yeah. One of the terms and processes that I haven't heard alluded to is gerrymandering, which, from what I understand, has a very major role in the way elections go. So I just really don't understand how they get set up and how they work.
Each state, every 10 years, goes through its redistricting of its state legislative districts and also its federal districts. Gerrymandering refers to Elbridge Gerry, who is from Massachusetts, one of the constitutional signers. And then what they did was they made a district in Massachusetts that looked like a salamander. It went around the entire Boston area without going into Boston, so it would reflect that political party. And then the word became gerrymandering. And in essence, what's happened in the last 20 to 30 years is that states have gerrymandered racially. That is to say, to go ahead and to create districts that would be minority-based or majority-based, and that way going ahead and assuring that representation would be biased one way or another depending on what that state wanted to have happen. In addition, states have also gone ahead and gerrymandered more subtly so it would reflect the politics of the state legislature that's involved. So if the Massachusetts legislature were Democrat or the Texas legislature were Republican, then that Texas legislature would go ahead and make sure that the districts would reflect voting behavior patterns. And therefore, they would go ahead to make sure that the Republican voters in the districts of Texas would be in the majority. And they do that by going ahead and taking a look at voter turnout. The Supreme Court has held that racially based districts are illegal and unconstitutional. So they have made sure that that doesn't happen. The idea of doing it according to party registration is much more subtle and much more difficult to contend with, but it is a very real problem that we have in our country.
Isn't the Electoral College somewhat based on slavery, and that it was an effort to give the slave states, the slaves couldn't vote, and there were fewer people to vote in the southern states. So this was an effort to give the southern states more voice. It just seems to me if that's the case, this is, you know, if it was based on slavery, what are we still doing having the Electoral College?
Okay, it's a little more complex than you indicated, but you're raising a very valid point, and that is when the, again, the town fathers, God bless them from where they are, we extol their virtues, but when they created the Constitution, 40% of them were slave owners. They owned slaves, and so they, again, looking at, we extol our Constitution, but there are some flaws that were there originally and are still there now. But among perhaps the major flaw of all time was that the southern states, you're correct, wanted to have a more powerful representation within the Electoral College in electing the presidency at that time. So you're absolutely correct. And they did the abominable aspect, or I should say authorship in the Constitution, the southern states did, of insisting that slaves be counted as 3/5 of a human being. So in the original Constitution, a slave was counted as 3/5 of a voter, so that the southern states would therefore have a greater popular vote and therefore have more votes in the Electoral College. That was, of course, the 13th Amendment and 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment of Abraham Lincoln to do two things, outlaw slavery, and then it's called the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th and 15th Amendment, that every citizen shall be counted the same way and have the same rights. But that's the way that worked out originally. Does that answer the question? Yes. Okay, ma'am.
Could you explain, please, the fact that the amendment giving women more rights never passed? That was actually somewhat recently, wasn't it?
It was recent. Have you followed that, Nazda? Do you know about that at all? This might have been before you got here from Bangladesh. Absolutely, it shows the difficulty of passing an amendment. This amendment was in the late 80s and 90s, that women would have the same rights as Americans, the same equal protection as men would have. Powerful majorities were in favor of the amendment, many state legislatures, but it never got the 2/3 vote from the House and the Senate. And I don't really want to go too much into it. I want to be very fair-minded, but many of the people who are conservative thought that the rights of women under the Constitution were already guaranteed by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th and 15th Amendments. And that's if anyone wants to represent it better than I can, I'm on the other side of that question. I was strongly in favor of it. But I think that's the reason why it failed, was that congressmen, the senators and representatives felt that the protection was already there in the 14th and 15th Amendment. It shows how difficult it is. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask a question about the Maine model, which sounds quite reasonable. And we've only had 2 states that have done that. Now, if other states believe that this is the way to go, what has to happen to make it come into practice?
Simple act of the state legislature. Can be done next week. Could be simple act of the state legislature. So there are ways that the state legislatures can act to change things, and I happen to favor that as well. I think it would be appropriate to go ahead and have each congressional district, just so you know, is within a state 550,000 people. So who's the congressperson for town of Wellesley? We have Catherine Clark in Weston, but who's the congressperson for? No. Kennedy. Okay, yeah, Joseph Kennedy. So Joseph Kennedy represents 500,000 people. Catherine Clark represents 500,000 people. Seth Moulton, 500,000 people. And so within those districts, as you go around the state, again, when I was a young, up-and-coming lad here in Massachusetts, Cape Cod was always conservative Republican, and so was Berkshire's. So if that was the case, then you would have those congressional districts going to vote for Mr. Trump while the rest went for Hillary. On the other hand, you'd have Atlanta, Georgia, very liberal, going for Hillary in the state of Georgia, and Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh going for Hillary while the rest of the state went. So it is a particular, it gets more local, and I would favor that type of reform. I think it's a good idea.
And based on that, there will be no swing state, concept.
Right.
Because you always have 2, 3, 4 swing state. If that amendment that way, then there will be no swing state.
Yeah, the Democrat would campaign down in Memphis, Tennessee. The Republican would campaign in northern New Hampshire, northern New York, and so that's a good idea.
How do you people get elected? How are electors elected? And who elects you?
The way that we're elected is the same in the Republican Party as it is in the Democratic Party, and in fact it's even the same for the Green Party or the independent parties. Nazda campaigned, she started campaigning for Hillary Clinton very, very early. So you campaign for your candidate in the primary season. At the convention, somebody wins the nomination. So in my case too, I was campaigning for Bill Clinton and he was beating 2 or 3 other people. When the nominee is announced, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, then each party holds a caucus about 4 weeks after that nomination. In the meantime, if you're interested in running for elector, you contact the campaign of the group, the person you campaign for. In my case, Al Gore and Bill Clinton. And I said, I'm interested in running for the Electoral College, and I would like to run for the office of elector. They would say, go for it. We acknowledge that you're a volunteer for us and you work for us, go for it. Then each of the parties has a caucus of its members of what's called the state committee of each party. There's a Republican state committee, there's a Democratic state committee. Nazda and I are on the Democratic state committee. There are around 200 of us. And the Republican state committee in Massachusetts would also have approximately 200 members. They would caucus separately. And in our case, I don't know, when I was running for 11 seats, and in the Democratic side, we insist on gender balance. In other words, you have to have 5 Democrats, 5 women and 5 men, and then the caucus can vote for the other individual, either male or female. I do not know whether the Republicans have this. Do you know whether they have the same gender balance? Does anyone know whether they have the? We have gender balance requirements in our party on the Democratic side. Now you come to this caucus 6 weeks after the convention, and it is a caucus in which you're electing 11, and in my case there were 35 people running. So 35 people are running for the 11 seats. You get up and you make a 1-minute speech. There are about 200 people in the hall, and then they vote by ballot for who the 11 shall be. So that's how it's all. And then when you win, I don't know whether it's true in your case, now you go and you vote on approximately the 3rd Monday in December, and then you're invited to the inauguration. So in Bill Clinton's inauguration in 1992, I was invited to the inauguration, and when you see the president making his inaugural address, there's a sea of people right sort of sitting down. The electors are allowed to sit in that area so that they can hear the president give his or her inauguration event, and then you go to the inaugural ball and have fun dancing with Aretha Franklin was the one who sang Aretha
And
Franklin.
also you did the White House tour.
Yes.
Yeah,
yeah.
that was the White House tour.
So I'm a little bit older than Nazda is, so we had Aretha Franklin. Whom do you have, Taylor Swift?
Yeah. No. It was
But that's how they...
Beyonce.
Who?
It was Beyonce.
Beyonce. But that's how the electors are. And we are constitutional officers once you're elected. So I'm now the Honorable Joe Mullin. This is the Honorable Nazda Alam. And that's how the election of the electors goes.
And in Massachusetts, it's a tradition that once you run for the elector and you won, you cannot run again.
Right.
That's just a respect. It's not any, constitutional policy, but it's just a respect.
Give someone else a turn.
Yeah, turn.
All right.
I think.
Which of your proposals are most likely to win to change the Electoral College?
I think
the easiest.
I think the idea of Maine and Nebraska, the idea of getting down, I think it's a limited ability, a limited reform. Doesn't go very far, but at least localizes and gives empowerment to some of the areas of our states that might be more Republican or more Democrat. I think that's something that would be, Colorado is thinking of doing that right away, by the way. So that's the reform that I think is the easiest to achieve. The Maryland reform goes much further, but they are going to, what they need to do is wait until many other states take up the reform before so they're not the only ones that are going to do that reform of insisting that their vote reflect the national election. In terms of the Constitution being changed, similar to the Equal Rights Amendment, I think it's a very, very uphill fight. There's something culturally ingrained in us that we think of rural areas, or we think there's some principle being espoused by having this possibility of the person finishing second, winning the presidency. But it's happened 5 times, and so it's quite likely that it may happen again. And I don't want to end on a pessimistic note, but I think the daunting task for us all is that when we elect the individual who finishes second with the fewest votes, it has consequences in policy making and in the running of our country. And it's something we should all be aware of, and use your representatives and congresspeople to try to make sure that happens. But that's what happens when someone finishes second.
Is there any group that's behind reform right now? Any?
Nazda, you may know, it was Senator Bai. I didn't know his group, but did you know that he was behind it?
Yes, he is, and also there are some, I don't exactly remember the names of them, but the few states are very actively collecting the signature, and I believe that more than 3 million signature already have.
Yes.
That is going on.
Nationwide, yes.
Yes, nationwide.
Nationwide.
And I think the mostly Democratic states are very advanced in doing that. The north and western part of the country are doing that. I hope I will have more information about that. I didn't think about that. Yes, it is.
Well, as we look to the future, what would you recommend for us as citizens to bring about a better system with the Electoral College?
Talk to your state legislatures about the Maine and Nebraska model. That's the easiest. And within Massachusetts in the last 20 years, whether it's a good development or not is where you're sitting. Depends on where you're sitting. Has become much more democratic, so it has much less of an effect. But if you talk to your state legislatures about devolving and having each congressional district have its own vote, that's something that could happen very, very quickly, and would begin to reform a little bit some of the inequities of the system.
Okay. Well, we thank you very much for spending this time with us.